Well, those are the headlines at this hour. This is the show where our team at CNBC-TV18 gets you the top stories of the day. I'm Shireen Khan. The top story this evening, heavy rains lash coastal Tamil Nadu and Puducherry as the states brace for Cyclone Nivar to make the landfall post-midnight. The Met Department has warned that the cyclone could intensify further into a very severe cyclonic storm. The National Disaster Response Force is on standby with a 1,200-strong contingent to aid the relief and rescue efforts. Tamil Nadu government has declared a public holiday today and several flights and trains have now been cancelled. Well, Jude Sanet joins us now from Chennai with the latest. Jude, what is the current situation and what kind of measures have now already been put in place in terms of evacuating people from the areas that are likely to bear the brunt of the landfall?
Well, in a nutshell, the situation here in Chennai, at least, is one where the city continues to brace for the worst, which isn't quite upon us just as yet. In fact, as you can see, there isn't much wind, although there have been several lashings of rain that have taken place at regular intervals. On the preparedness front, as you can see in my frame, there is a continuous flow of water at the Adyar River, where we're reporting to you from the banks. We're reporting you, of course, from the banks of this river, because the Tamil Nadu government has released 1,000 cusecs of water from the city's largest reservoir, the Chembarambakkam reservoir, remember, which was at the center of controversy back in 2015 when the Chennai floods hit, since that release of water took place at the very last minute. So the government really leaving no stone unturned and ensuring that there is a regular release of water from the reservoir down this river so as to ensure that there is no flooding in Chennai on account of Cyclone Nivar. Now, more interestingly, as far as relief and rescue is concerned, the Tamil Nadu government has opened 77 relief camps across the city so as to ensure that should flooding occur overnight, people in low-lying areas will have a place to go and find relief in. Most of the centers also have COVID testing facilities. The fact remains that while winds of 120 to 130 kilometers per hour could lash, places like Puducherry later today when the cyclone does make landfall, gusting could go up to 145 kilometers in certain pockets. So the fact remains that while the city, the state and neighboring states like Puducherry and Andhra Pradesh are bracing for the worst, the government is doing all it can to ensure that it has learnt lessons from the 2016 cyclone Varda, from the 2015 floods and also cyclones Oki and Gaja. Will it work? Won't it work? I guess we'll know in a few hours from now.
Well, for now, Jude Sanet, thanks very much for joining us. That is the latest there. Preparations ahead of Cyclone Nivar making its landfall later tonight. 77 relief camps being set up, as Jude was pointing out. Thanks very much for that update. Let's take a look at the latest on the COVID front now. India's coronavirus tally has crossed the 92 lakh mark with an addition of over 44,000 new cases. Active cases have also failed to hold the declining momentum and have now risen by over 6,000. Meanwhile, single-day recoveries have fallen below the 40,000 mark for the first time in 4 months, and the death toll has risen by less than 500 for the second straight day. On the testing front, single-day figure has risen to about 11.6 lakh. That's the highest that we've seen in the last 2 weeks. Well, that's the latest on the COVID tally. Later on the show, we bring you the results of a local circles survey on the spread of COVID-19 in India. The survey shows that 9 out of 10 Indians now know at least one person in their social network who has been diagnosed with COVID-19. Well, that's coming up, but some of the other headlines that we are tracking, starting with the crucial decisions taken by the Cabinet. A CNBC-TV18 newsbreak confirmed. In a bid to boost infrastructure projects, the Union Cabinet has cleared the infusion of 6,000 crore rupees into the debt platform of the National Infra Investment Fund, that's the NIIF. This was part of the stimulus announcement made recently by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. The infusion will be made over 2 years, and this year will see 2,400 crore rupees being infused.
ये जो नेशनल इन्वेस्टमेंट एंड इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर फंड है, इसमें आज के कैबिनेट ने निर्णय किया कि 6,000 करोड़ रुपए का निवेश करेंगे। 2 साल का ही प्लान है ये। अभी जो 6,000 है, इस साल पहले 2,400 करोड़ रुपए है और अगले साल बाकी मिलेंगे और उसके द्वारा ये काम पूरा होगा।
Well, that's one of the decisions taken by the Cabinet. Here are the others. The central government has also waved the green flag for the merger of the crisis-hit Lakshmi Vilas Bank with DBS India. Remember, Lakshmi Vilas Bank has been placed under a 1-month moratorium due to poor financial health. The Information and Broadcasting Minister has promised that those who made mistakes will be punished and also called for more regulatory oversight.
So Lakshmi Vilas Bank will be amalgamated with Development Bank India Limited, a private bank. The 20 lakh depositors and 20,000 crore deposits are now fully secured. They need not worry, they need not rush. Their deposits are in the best hands.
So the Cabinet approving the LVB-DBS amalgamation. The Cabinet has also approved nearly 2,500 crore rupees worth of foreign direct investment in ATC Telecom Infra. ATC Asia Pacific was the investor in the company. Well, here's a CNBC-TV18 exclusive. The centre is planning to take steps to ensure that BPCL's LPG consumers continue to get the benefits of the subsidy scheme for at least 5 years post the company's strategic sale. Anshu Sharma, who broke that story, joins us now with more. Anshu, what is the government likely to do? Will they need cabinet approval?
That's right. We understand from government sources that Oil Ministry has decided to keep BPCL as a divested entity for 3 to 5 years period to help in continuation of LPG subsidy post stake sale. Now, the idea is to grandfather the subsidy regime for BPCL consumers, which is close to 7.3 crore in total, and during this period of 3 to 5 years, that will be government's agenda. Sources have told me that Oil Ministry is likely to seek a cabinet nod for grandfathering the transfer of BPCL's LPG subsidy consumers. BPCL has 7.3 crore LPG consumers, and we learned that transfer of BPCL's consumer for subsidy is likely between IOC and HPCL. Now, IOC already has LPG consumer base of over 13 crores and HPCL has about 7.8 crore. Now, all this will happen only when there's a suitable bidder for BPCL strategic sale. As we know that government has received multiple expression of interest, which also includes Vedanta for stake sale of government stake of about 53%, which could garner about 44,000 crore rupees under divestment target, which is 1.2 lakh crore for the current financial year. Back to you.
Okay, so that is the latest on BPCL. But Anshu, you've got another exclusive that you're tracking. Let's talk about that one now. The crackdown on Chinese apps. The government, we understand, plans to ban more Chinese applications. Sources say the telecom department has written to internet service providers to block more apps. Anshu joins us now with that story as well. Anshu, how many more on the list of apps that are likely to be banned? And what is the government's plan now?
That's right. Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has identified 47 more mobile apps for blocking. Now, these apps which have been identified for blocking is under the section 69A of Information Technology Act, and the government has taken action based on the inputs regarding these 47 apps for engaging in activities which are prejudicial to sovereignty and integrity of India, the defense of India, security of state and public order. Since June this year, the government has blocked 220 apps of Chinese origin. Just a day back, it blocked 43 apps, which included many mobile apps from Alibaba company like AliExpress, Alipay, amongst others. We learn from sources that Department of Telecommunication has written to the internet service providers to block these 47 mobile apps. Some of the apps include Share IT, Beauty Plus, Beauty Cam, Makeup Camera, games like Clash of Queens, Clash of Kings, amongst others. Clearly, there is tension brewing between India and China that these apps are being blocked. Back to you.
All right, Anshu, many thanks. So that is the latest on the block list. Other headlines we're tracking at this hour: Indian equities slide from their record highs, ending the day with cuts. The Sensex and the Nifty closed with losses of 1.5% each, as investors booked profit after the significant bull run that we've seen in the last few days. India's GST collection may cross 1.1 lakh crore rupees in November. Government sources say strong GST mop-up is expected on the back of festive season sales and a revival in demand. Nearly 2.5 lakh people took to the skies in November, leading to a 44% increase in air passenger traffic compared to October. But even as demand continues to rise steadily, industry is worried that it may not be sustainable, especially after Mumbai has made it mandatory for passengers to carry a COVID-19 RT-PCR test. Anu Sharma joins us now with more details. Anu, demand returning, but industry remains cautious.
So there has been a steady rise in the domestic air passenger traffic. Now, if you look at the November 22nd figure, over 237,000 passengers took to the skies, and this was at 60% of 2019 levels. If you compare this with October 22nd data, now that was at 40% of 2019 levels. So overall, there is a 47% jump on a monthly basis if you compare the two figures. Similarly, if you look at the flight departures, those have increased to over 1,800 on November 22nd. So thereby reaching 63% of 2019 levels vis-a-vis 56% of 2019 levels a month ago on October 22nd. So overall, yes, there is an increase in the domestic air passenger traffic, but the recent restrictions, for example, the recent government move by the state government of Maharashtra saying that there will be mandatory RT-PCR tests for flights coming from Gujarat, Rajasthan, Goa and Gujarat. That is expected to have a dip in the bookings for the flights coming from these four states. We spoke to several industry experts and travel portals. Ease My Trip tells us that they are seeing 70% of the bookings taking place for travel over the next 3 days, and Delhi, Mumbai, Goa, Bengaluru, Kolkata, these are some of the busiest routes so far, but they do anticipate dip in the bookings for flights to Maharashtra because of these restrictions. They are getting increasing number of queries about the test being done at the airport, at the departure airport, at the arrival. What are the different procedures, which labs to go for as far as these RT-PCR tests are concerned. So passengers are concerned about these tests, so that is expected to lead to a slight dip in the bookings in the near term. But overall, yes, there is a gradual rise in the domestic air passenger traffic, while mandatory RT-PCR tests may have an impact in the near term. For now, back to you.
All right, Anu, many thanks. Now, the pharma sector has so far shown a mixed response to the government's production-linked incentive scheme under its Atmanirbhar Bharat plan. The government has approved 15,000 crore rupees for the pharma sector to boost local production. Sonal Bhutra joins us now. Sonal, why the mixed response to the PLI scheme for the pharma sector?
Thanks a lot for that. Well, pharmaceutical companies, they have given a mixed response to the production-linked incentive scheme. Let me start with Divi's Labs, the biggest player in the API space. And the company says that PLI scheme is less applicable to the company. However, they are still trying to understand the API benefits that this company and scheme has laid out. Moving on to Solara Active Pharma, the company says that they are applying for the PLI scheme, and recent amendments, according to them, are quite positive. Moving on and talking about Laurus Labs, that company has done really well in terms of stock price performance. They think that PLI is a good step and they are evaluating this scheme. Granules, on the other hand, they are still evaluating it, and they say that higher incentives are needed so as to get more attraction as far as investment is concerned. Aarti Drugs, well, that stock has surged, in fact, 7 times from the lows only on the back of this API theme. They are planning capex of around 150 to 200 crores in next 3 to 5 years in this particular scheme itself. Moving on to Newland Labs, they think that out of the 53 APIs and drugs that are mentioned, 1 to 2 APIs should benefit, but they think they need more clarifications as details are not yet clear. Moving on to IOL Chemicals, they are working on 4 to 5 products within this scheme. Lupin says that it is, of course, a step in the right direction, and around 6 to 7 products they are reviewing closely so as to take a decision. Ipca Labs says they are in fact ready with an application to be submitted for 2 synthetic products, and they will be doing as soon as possible. Alembic Pharma says that PLI scheme is not a priority for them, and they do not see themselves as a major API player, and that's why not so much interest coming in from Alembic Pharma. Lastly, Aurobindo Pharma, they've been saying it for quite some time that they're evaluating the PLI scheme, and few products appear interesting. They will take a step, or they will file an application if they think there are enough positives in this scheme. But all in all, the gist is companies need more incentives, and they are still not very clear as to what the benefits this particular scheme provides. So we'll have to wait and watch for this space.
All right, Sonal, many thanks. So more clarity as well as more incentives needed when it comes to the Pharma PLI scheme. News just coming in. Lakshmi Vilas Bank will be merged with DBS Bank India effective November 27th. Lakshmi Vilas Bank's shares will be written off and delisted from Friday. So this was as part of the amalgamation plan. What we now have is a date. So it will be effective the 27th of November. That is the latest as part of the Gazette notification. Time for us to head into a break, but up next, the highlights from the Local Circles survey, which shows that 9 out of 10 Indians now know at least one person in their social network who's been diagnosed with COVID-19. That and more when we return. 9 out of 10 Indians claim to know at least one person in their social network who has been diagnosed with COVID-19. This according to a Local Circles survey, which received more than 9,000 responses from across 208 Indian districts. A similar survey published in September had highlighted that 77% of the respondents knew at least one person who had tested positive with coronavirus. Local Circles, while conducting the survey, also observed that many people were reluctant to get tested for COVID despite showing symptoms. Sachin Taparia, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer at Local Circles, joins us. Sachin, many thanks for joining us. So 9,000 people surveyed across 208 districts. And what's interesting is that even if people are symptomatic or mildly symptomatic, they're preferring not to get tested, even if they do know somebody within the family or within their social circle who has tested positive with COVID-19. So the numbers that we see flashing on our screens at 8 a.m. every morning, as we've been pointing out, it looks like that is an underrepresentation of the actual growth in COVID infections.
Absolutely, Shireen. So we've got about 2 or 3 different complaints from citizens across the country. The first one was that, look, there's somebody that we know who has got tested, who is tested positive, but they have 3 or 4 family members who are all home and who have actually not undertaken the test. So, what is happening is that unless there is, a comorbidity with an individual at home, that individual's immediate family in many of these cases is actually avoiding to get tested, number one. Number two, people have stopped now informing their, society RWA or the colony RWA as well. So that brings, an added risk to the whole COVID spread, basically. And the third thing that, people are reporting is now that, there are so many cases, there is literally, very little follow-up or visit by government officials. Earlier what would happen is that somebody from the government would come and local authorities and, sanitize your home, call it a containment zone. Because none of that is happening, there is really no follow-up. Nobody is telling individuals to, get their immediate family tested. And I think that is leading to, many of the cases, that are actually cases not getting reported in the numbers. So that's why we actually did this survey, which is, asking people across the country that, look, do you know somebody in your friends, family, neighbors, colleagues, who has tested positive for COVID? And this number was at 7% citizens in the month of May, and it's shot up by, 1,100% or 12 times now in the month of November. So I think that's really a concern that the numbers are understated. And if we were to actually look at the real numbers, we'll be looking at much higher numbers.
Yes, that of course has been something that many experts have been pointing out to as well. But Sachin, you talked about how there is lack of follow-up from government authorities and civic bodies, etc. And I would imagine that that's partly to do with the fact that you just have so many more cases now to deal with. So there is a bandwidth issue. There is also COVID fatigue. But on the side of the citizens, I mean, festive season, we saw large gatherings at marketplaces. We've seen the Diwali parties and so on and so forth. There's COVID fatigue that's set in on the citizen side as well, which perhaps is leading to this behavior which almost seems as if the pandemic is over.
No, absolutely. And what worries me, Shireen, is you got the next 2-3 weeks is the wedding period, in India, the biggest one actually. And you have the winter setting in, and global studies have indicated that the droplets actually travel, much farther than the 6 feet norm that we call for social distancing. And the virus is more persistent in cooler temperatures. So you've got the winter and the wedding effect coming in the next 2 to 3 weeks, which will, not help with the situation. And, given what we have in some parts of India where you have, lots of cases and a post-festive surge, I think that is where some kind of decisive action is needed based on the local situation.
Yes, what we have seen, of course, many governments announce are night curfews. In fact, the Punjab government is the latest to join the night curfew bandwagon. But Sachin, any inputs from people on things like night curfews, etc.? I mean, have you, I don't know if it was part of your poll, but any feedback that you're getting on the kind of restrictions that are now being imposed?
So we've gotten some feedback, Shireen. I think by and large, people are against any kind of a national lockdown or even a state level lockdown. But, majority, 60 to 70%, as I would say, are still okay with some restrictions being imposed to contain the spread in areas. If you look at the entire, India district profile, you only have about 60 to 65 districts out of the 740 or 735, where you have more than 1,000 cases and a post-festive surge. So I think it's become a local problem, and I think people are okay, by and large, to live with a 2-3 week night curfew, weekend shutdown, some restrictions which will just help contain and break the chain of the virus spread.
Yes, in fact, we've just got a government release out. The Ministry of Home Affairs has put out its latest guidelines saying that there must be strict adherence to the SOPs on COVID-appropriate behavior and exercise caution and regulate crowds. This is the guidelines and the advisory that's gone out to states and union territories. So essentially, surveillance activities to be stepped up in containment zones. That is what the MHA is telling states and union territories to do. And of course, as far as strict adherence to the prescribed SOPs, again, reiterating that state governments and union territories may reduce the ceiling to 100 people or less in closed spaces when it comes to social gatherings, religious gatherings, sports, entertainment, cultural gatherings as well. Remember, many states have allowed all of this as per the MHA guidelines, and we've seen states like Delhi also stepping back and cutting down the numbers that should be allowed for weddings, etc. So now the MHA reiterating that states should take that call on whether they want to bring down the numbers further for any of these social or religious gatherings. Local restrictions, of course, again, up to states and union territories to impose local restrictions based on the assessment of the situation. But importantly, no restrictions on interstate and intrastate movement. The centre making it clear there shall be no restriction on interstate and intrastate movement of persons and goods, including those for cross-land border trade. So no separate permissions or e-permits will be required. So that's good to know, because this was the fear that once again we would start to see this happen at the borders. That's the latest then from the Ministry of Home Affairs, the guidelines and the advisory being handed out to states and union territories. Sachin Taparia, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18 with the latest from the LocalCircles survey. We will wrap things up here on this edition of Reporter's Diary. Thanks very much for watching. Stay tuned. We're back in a moment.